about the same time that Kirsten Flagstad was having so much trouble persuading American audiences that her wartime activities had been completely innocent, another famous musician was tuning up for his triumphant return to the United States. Shortly before a scheduled Carnegie Hall recital, the New York Times published an account of his wartime antics, and he was met at the airport by agents of the United States Immigration Service, who kept him in custody while looking into his Nazi past. He called off the recital, and on boarding the Air France flight bound for Paris, said indignantly, "This is the first time in my life I have not been treated as an artist should be treated." Given all that he had been, it was surprising he had been treated half as well. Although born in Lyon, France, on November the 5th, 1895, the pianist Walter Gieseking's parents were German. And while their young son was never allowed to go to French public schools, he nonetheless absorbed an enormous amount of French musical culture, becoming his generation's supreme interpreter of the piano music of Debussy and Ravel. As early as 1933, Gieseking was a member of the Nazi Militant League for German Culture and was the co-editor of a Nazi music magazine. He not only gave propaganda concerts at the request of the government, but also refused to have anything to do with any Jewish musician after 1933, firing his Jewish manager in that same year, and always ended his letters with the words, "Heil Hitler." In all, Gieseking gave nearly 200 lightest objection. Like so many musicians with Nazi sympathies, Walter Gieseking not only resumed his career within a few years of the end of the war, but also did so to almost universal acclaim. And curiously enough, other musicians who would seem to have done far less were not so fortunate. Perhaps not so much because of what they did, but where they did it. Shortly after the Nazi takeover of Germany, the French pianist Alfred Cortot joined a number of other musicians, including Joseph Hoffmann, Bronislaw Huberman, and his old friend and recital partner, the violinist Jacques Thibault, who refused to perform in German concert halls as long as Hitler remained in power. Unfortunately, Alfred Cortot had no difficulties playing in the concert halls of occupied France. He worked closely with the Vichy government's Department of Cultural Affairs and was a mainstay on the Nazi-controlled Paris radio. Following the liberation, Courteau was arrested as a collaborator, and although eventually released, his attempt to resume his career in 1946 was met with such a storm of protest that he was forced to move to Switzerland, where he lived in virtual retirement among others who had been forced to flee their homelands in disgrace. From the very beginning, the Dutch conductor Willem Mengelberg had marked Germanic sympathies. He was the descendant of an old Rhineland family, was educated at the Cologne Conservatory, and was a tireless champion of almost all German music, including the scores of his friend Richard Strauss. Still, nothing could have prepared his fellow countrymen for what they considered the conductor's treasonous behavior during the Second World War. In the week that Rotterdam was nearly bombed out of existence, the conductor went on the Dutch radio, talking gibberish about his two favorite countries, Germany and Holland, now living in eternal friendship forever. As early as 1936, Mengelberg had drawn fire in the Dutch press for his positive attitude toward Hitler. In 1941, he accepted a membership in the Nazi Culture Cabinet, and throughout the war he enjoyed being seen in the company of high Nazi officials. He conducted extensively throughout Germany, becoming a familiar figure on the podium of the Berlin Philharmonic. Following the end of the war, Mengelberg, who had taken refuge at his chalet in Switzerland, was stripped of all his awards and honors, including a gold medal presented him by Queen Wilhelmina and a handsome annual subsidy, and was forbidden by the Dutch government to conduct in Holland for the remainder of his lifetime. Mengelberg appealed the sentence, which was eventually reduced to 6 years, which, given his age and failing health, amounted to the same thing. Like the war criminals at the Nuremberg trials who had used what became the standard defense that they had been merely following orders, an astonishing percentage of artists like Willem Mengelberg would claim that they had no interest in politics, as if what the Nazis practiced had been anything remotely resembling politics, and had instead only been interested in practicing their art. While few, if any, such artists would ever take responsibility for their actions, one, during the dark winter of 1946, apparently did. The Austrian conductor Oswald Kabasta, who was famous for his interpretations of the original versions of the Bruckner symphonies, and was chosen to lead the world premiere of the Fourth Symphony of the Austrian composer Franz Schmidt, began his career teaching singing in the Vienna Secondary School. After conducting in various Austrian provincial theaters, he became the music director of the Vienna Radio in 1931, permanent conductor of the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde and Vienna Symphony in 1935, and eventually head of the celebrated School for Conductors of the Vienna Academy of Music. In 1938, he was appointed to his last important post as Zeeland von Hausiger's successor as music director of the Munich Philharmonic. One of Kabasta's pupils, Erich Leinsdorf, considered him an unusually versatile and imaginative conductor. And the commercial recordings that Kabasta made in Munich do tend to bear this out. From the late 1930s onward, Oswald Kabasta, like many Austrians, had been an enthusiastic supporter of Hitler and the Nazis. But as the war dragged on, he began to have second thoughts. After his concert hall in Munich was destroyed by Allied bombs late in 1944, and the full scope of the Nazi atrocities became increasingly clear, Kabasta was thrown into a depression from which he would not emerge. Haunted by the newsreel images of the death camps and consumed by guilt, he returned to his home in the Tyrol, where he committed suicide on February the 6th, 1946.